All right, so it is time for technical assistance grants again this year. We're going to go over some eligibility guidelines, project guidelines, how to apply this year. Our application is entirely online, so that's something new. And I promise you it will be an improvement. And then I'll take your questions. So let's go ahead and get started. If you're not familiar with the Preservation League, we are New York State's nonprofit working for historic preservation. We are a statewide nonprofit. We are headquartered in Albany, but we work in all 62 counties of the state. And we promote the role that preservation plays in community revitalization, sustainable economic growth, and the protection of our historic buildings and landscapes. We lead advocacy, economic development, and educational programs across the state. The way that we realize our mission is through a number of programs. We work with our local colleagues, so you may be familiar with your local preservation colleagues. In central New York, that would be PACNY. In the southern tier, that would be PAST, Preservation Buffalo Niagara, Preservation Long Island, ARCH up in the Adirondacks, and everywhere in between. So we help empower our local nonprofits to work for preservation in their communities. We also work toward effective public policy and advocacy in Albany and at the national level. We provide technical services on our website and through presentations such as this one to help you preserve your historic buildings. We have our 7 to Save program, which shines a spotlight on endangered buildings. Every 2 years, we produce a list of 7 buildings or 7 types of buildings that deserve a little extra attention. We also give grants. So twice a year, we have our grant programs. We have the technical assistance grants now in the fall, and in the springtime, we have Preserve New York grants. We also give out excellence awards. So we pay attention to what's going on across the state. And when we see a nomination for a preservation project that deserves to be recognized, we take that into consideration, and we produce these awards once a year. So I believe the process just ended here shortly for us, so we'll be announcing those awards shortly for this year. We also have our preservation book club. So once a month, we discuss a book that we're reading that we think applies to historic preservation in some way, shape, or form. So I urge you to check our website and get involved in our book club. It's a lot of fun and it's always inspirational. Oh yeah, you see at the Mayor of Rockville Center, absolutely. And last but not least, we give out scholarships to promising young scholars in historic preservation. So we're proud of that program as well. So as I mentioned, we have 2 grant programs a year, TAG and Preserve New York. These are partnership programs with the New York State Council on the Arts, with additional funding from the Robert David Lyon Gardner Foundation for projects occurring on Long Island. And the Hudson River Valley National Heritage Area also provides support for our technical assistance grants. So we're very grateful for these partnerships and for their support. So let's talk about TAG grants. Eligible applicants, you know what? Let me just point out, first of all, that technical assistance grants are intended entirely for preservation planning projects. So we're going to go over what those projects are in just a moment, but I wanted to point out that both of our grant programs, TAG and PNY, both fund preservation planning projects. This is one of the first steps that you should take before doing rehabilitation on a building. This gets expert eyes on your building and expert advice on what needs to happen. And of course, the goal being to preserve the historic integrity of your building while bringing it up to 21st century standards so that it can be effectively used and realize its highest and best purpose. So with that in mind, if you're thinking about applying for a TAG grant, you should be part of a nonprofit, 501c3 specifically, or a municipality. So we do fund villages and towns and 501c3 nonprofits. Unfortunately, our grants are not available to religious organizations, but we do provide resources for congregations who ask. In order to apply, you need to be the owner of your building or have a long-term lease. So, if you're part of a friends group, for instance, this is something that has cropped up quite a bit lately, actually. If you're part of a friends group, I urge you to get a long-term lease on your building. If you are part of a friends group that stewards a building that's owned by a nonprofit, a 501c3 nonprofit, they can apply, and you can certainly work with them in order to put together the application. But either way, if you do have a long-term lease on your building, the owner of the building also needs to be either a 501c3 nonprofit or a municipality. So your building needs to have an arts or a cultural purpose. So this is specific to technical assistance grants. This does not apply to our P&Y grant program in the springtime. So for instance, if you're a municipality and you're thinking about applying for your fire station or your police station or a historic building in your town that serves more of a public purpose, but not necessarily arts or cultural, then Preserve New York would be the grant program for you. But for TAG, we want that building to specifically have an arts or cultural purpose. Now, TAG grants top out at $4,000. So because we require a 20% cash match, your project should not cost more than $5,000. Keep in mind that these preservation planning projects should be fairly simple for an architect or an engineer to carry out. These projects shouldn't take them more than a few days to come and visit your site and put together their notes. They will come back to you with a report. They have 6 months to a year to complete their projects. So these are fairly short-term projects, but your project shouldn't cost more than $5,000. On your screen, let's talk a little bit about the Halleckville Museum Farm. So they received a TAG grant last year for $4,000 for a feasibility reuse study of their barn. So this museum wanted to use their historic barn as additional program space, and this TAG grant allowed them to get this study done by a preservation architect who could come in and show them how to reuse their building the best way possible, while installing lighting, electric, accessibility ramps. You can see the steps leading into the building. They wanted a better accessibility, all while preserving the historic integrity of their barn. So technical assistance grants eligible projects include the ones on your screen, but are not limited to these. So we'll talk about that in a moment too. But by and large, the kinds of preservation planning projects that TAG funds include accessibility studies, building condition surveys, and this is like a condition assessment of your building, but looking at a specific issue or set of issues that your building is facing, and engineering structural analysis, feasibility reuse study, specialized conservation study, and finally, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing analyses. And this can include fire suppression studies and HVAC studies as well. So the building on your screen is the Norwood House from the Science Museum of Long Island. They received a $4,000 TAG grant in 2020 to look specifically at their windows. Now look at this building. It's got a ton of windows. They're varied. They're in various states of condition, and they needed to have a good plan for preserving and maintaining their historic windows. So that's what this study was intended to do for them. All right. So before we go much further, let's talk a little bit about capital project planning. Oh, we have a question. Let's see. The question is, we're not a building, but a sculpture garden with 14 concrete statues that are nearing 100 years old. We're listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Would we be eligible? Yes, if you're a 501c3 nonprofit, then you would be an eligible applicant or a municipality. As far as the project goes, the concrete statues, I don't think that they would be eligible for a preservation planning grant. And the reason I say that is because we do get occasionally inquiries from cemeteries that want to do a study on preserving their headstones. And unfortunately, that's not the intent of the grant. So headstones, monuments, things like that don't really fall under a TAG grant. That's more intended for the structure itself. So one thing that you might be able to do for something like that, I mean, it is a sculpture garden. A cultural landscape report might be able to help you, something like that. But unfortunately, I think the sculptures themselves would not be able to be the subject of a TAG grant. So thank you for your question. That's a very good question. And another question about air conditioning installation. Yes, so installing air conditioning, updated HVAC systems in historic buildings can be really challenging. So if you're not really thrilled about busting holes in walls to run ductwork, which you shouldn't be in a historic building, then yes, getting a MEP study would be a good idea. So to help you figure out how to get your air conditioning installed the best way possible. So good question, Marguerite, thank you. All right. Okay, so when you're thinking about applying for a TAG grant, there's a few things that you should consider first. Think about the potential project and how it fits your mission. So the reason I say that is our historic buildings really help our organizations meet their mission in a number of ways. And sometimes the buildings are not doing the best job at that if they're not accessible, or if the use of space in the building could be better. Perhaps the acoustics are poor in a space that you want to use for performing arts. I mean, things like that affect your ability to meet your mission. So think about this project and how it can help you meet your mission. And by project, when I say project, I mean the TAG project specifically. So the preservation planning project that you're about to embark on. So, and then think about fundraising. So the preservation planning project itself would be largely covered by your TAG grant, and but everything that lies beyond your planning projects, such as capital expenses, rehabilitation costs, renovations, things like that, it's going to cost money, and grants alone aren't going to cover it. So think about whether it's a good time for your organization to take on a fundraising campaign. Make sure that your board is on board with this. If you're a municipality, make sure that your point person is committed, and make sure they have good partnerships in the local government and with the community in order to achieve your preservation goals for your building. And finally, be prepared to hire qualified building professionals. I know that's everybody's goal, and it's easier said than done. But the good thing about a TAG grant is that it will put you in contact with professionals who have connections in the building industry. So your consultant, your engineer or your architect, they're going to know of people who can actually do this work for you, and they can help you identify those professionals. So that's another benefit of getting a TAG grant that you might not realize right away, is they'll help you find the people to do the work later. All right, so a couple more things to consider is how your technical assistance grant project fits in to the larger picture of your capital project. So TAG grants fit into the first couple steps here. So thinking about your project, take a good look at your building first and do a little condition assessment of your own and consider what the building really needs. You may not know exactly what your building needs, but you're probably familiar with some of the issues that your building has, and start thinking about prioritizing how you're going to address those issues. So do a little condition assessment within your organization, and then decide on what kind of preservation planning study you want. Oftentimes our historic buildings need a bunch of things, and maybe it needs a new roof. That should always come first. You always want your roof to be in good condition, but maybe you don't know what needs to happen with your roof. Maybe it's unusual. Maybe you want a study done. You can certainly get a TAG grant to have a building conditions study done of your roof, so that you know what to expect. Part of that study would also give you an idea of what it might cost to have it repaired. Your architect isn't going to give you estimates of what it's going to cost to repair your roof, but they can give you their best guess. They can give you an idea so you know how to plan your fundraising and plan for the future of your building. Maybe your building needs some accessibility upgrades. Sometimes that's one of the first things you want to do. Make sure you can get people into your building for your programs. So think about what preservation planning study might be most appropriate at this time to embark on. And then get your TAG grant. Good luck. It's competitive, but it's easy to apply for and it's worth it. So go for your TAG grant and then start thinking about the capital project itself. What's going to come after that TAG grant. And your consultant can help you a little bit with this too. So, the following steps in this process will come later, but this just sort of helps you conceptualize how a TAG grant fits into the overall picture of a capital project. All right, so let's take a look at some examples of good TAG projects that we funded in the past. So from last year, we funded a building condition survey for the Sanctuary for Independent Media in Rensselaer County. They are located in a historic church that was built around 1900. And they had already done quite a bit of work on the interior of this church in order to make it functional for their purposes. They do all sorts of things. I urge you to look into this organization. As a matter of fact, we did a spotlight on them in our blog on our website. So please check that out. You'll be amazed at the things that the Sanctuary for Independent Media is doing out of this little building. So they had already done quite a bit of work on the interior of the building with the help of the Troy Architectural Program. And then they turned their sights to the exterior of the building. So the Troy Architectural Program is coming back to help them by doing a building condition survey of the building envelope. Now you might be wondering what the difference is between a building condition survey and a building condition report that you can have funded through our Preserve New York program. Well, a building condition survey deals only with a specific aspect of your building. So in this case, they're looking specifically at the exterior of the building, just at the building envelope. What does the outside need for good maintenance and rehabilitation? So they had some issues you can see in the photographs here that they were concerned with. And the Troy Architectural Program will help them to prioritize maintenance tasks on the outside of their building now. So engineering and structural analysis. At first glance, you might think that this building is unsavable. And who would want to save it anyway? Well, this building is actually kind of amazing. It was built, the old part of it, on the right-hand side of the first photograph. That part of the building was built in about 1657. In the town of Huntington, this was the first mill in the town. The building has been moved since then. So that was a question I got recently, if a building that's been moved might be eligible for a TAG grant, and the answer is yes. So this building was moved clear back, I don't know, I think in the 1700s. It was a while ago, to its present location where it was converted into a private residence. In about 1875, there was a wing built onto this building. That's the left side, the side that's actually in the worst condition. So what the town of Huntington wants to do with this building is they want to move it again, because the ground that it's sitting on is wetter than it was 200 years, 300 years ago. So the building is sinking. It has sunk up to its windowsills. And the structural analysis that they want to have done will determine whether this building can withstand being moved, first of all, and then the proper way to do it, whether it can actually be unearthed and moved, or if it has to be completely disassembled and moved and then reassembled on its new site. So this is important stuff. This analysis will help them to know how they can move forward with this building. And the plan for this building is for it to become the basis of the town of Huntington's African American History Museum. The reason they want to use this building specifically for it is because this building was actually purchased in the early 19th century by Peter Crippen, for whom the house is named. And he was a man of African American descent from Virginia who moved up to the town of Huntington. This house remained in his family until 2019. So aside from that, the town of Huntington has a very rich African-American history to celebrate, and they want this building to be rehabilitated and serve as the basis for that museum. So how fascinating is that? So, all right, so another example of a good technical assistance project is a feasibility and reuse study. So in this case, the Greater Mohawk Valley Land Bank got a $3,600 TAG grant to do a study of the Hogue House, this adorable little house built in 1830. They want this to be the center of the beginning of their walking tours, a visitor center of sorts. They're not sure if that's really feasible or not. So they're getting a feasibility study thanks to their technical assistance grant. Now, I wanted to point out too that these examples that I'm giving are only a few examples. Feasibility reuse studies can look a lot differently than this one as well. So I just got a call today from an organization, an arts organization that has an attic space that they think might be able to serve a better purpose for them. Right now it's unused space. And so can they turn it into artist studios? Who knows, but they're going to get an architect to come in and look at the space and produce a feasibility and reuse study for their attic so that they can maybe expand their programming space right within their own building. All right, so let's talk a little bit about specialized conservation studies. There's a little bit of confusion surrounding the name of this particular study because of the word conservation. Typically, we associate that with collections or archives, but in this case, we're talking about the conservation of a specific aspect of your building, usually a specific material or something even more specific than you might find in a building condition study. So last year, we awarded the D&H Canal Historical Society $4,000 for a specialized conservation study that will give them a historic paint analysis of the Dupuy Tavern. So this 1797 building has layers of paint, as old buildings typically do. And they want to determine a few things from their study. So for one thing, they would like to see, they would like to learn a little bit about the construction history of this building through paint analysis. So this study will allow them to do that. They're going to have exterior paint study done as well as interior. So this will be sort of an archaeological study of their paint on their building. But that's just one kind of specialized conservation study that's possible with our TAG grants. So another specialized conservation study that we funded here recently was for Boscoville House and Gardens. They received just under $2,500 to look specifically at their door latches and locks. So the story here is that in the Boscoville house, they have guided tours that go all through the house. And their docents, most of them volunteers, most of them elderly, had started having a little bit of problem with the door latches and locks. Because of security and safety, they need to keep these doors locked. And as they move through the house giving their tours, they have to unlock the door and let everyone through and relock it behind them. And just the way that these locks are designed makes that a little bit arduous for them. So they're looking to see if there's something that they can do, maybe replace these, make things a little bit safer and a little bit more user-friendly for their docents. So I thought that was a pretty unique specialized conservation study that we funded. And hopefully it'll result in some better accessibility for their building. So one more example of a specialized conservation study here is from Preservation Buffalo Niagara. One of the buildings that they own is a masonry building, it's brick, and it has layers of sealants and paint on their brick. And as part of the overall rehabilitation of this site, they're wondering if they should reseal it, repaint it, or expose the brick. And in addition to that, they're wondering what kind of mortar mix is needed to properly repoint the masonry on this building. So, you know, as a specialized conservation study, they're dealing with specific materials, as I mentioned, and in this case, it's brick and mortar, quite literally. So. All right, so another type of study that we fund through TAG are accessibility studies, and the Grand Street Community Arts in Albany County needed to make their building more accessible. So you can see in the picture on the left, you know, some of these old buildings, they're not easy to get into if you're in a wheelchair or if you have mobility issues. So they need to get the public in for their programs, and this handicap accessibility study will help them do just that. So last year, we awarded technical assistance grants all across the state, from Long Island to Buffalo and everywhere in between. We awarded almost all of the project types. It looks like we didn't have any mechanical, electrical, or plumbing analyses, but I do have an example coming up for you of one of those that I really liked. You know, we awarded, wow, over $96,000 in TAG grants last year. It was one of our biggest years ever. So when you're ready to apply, what do you do? Well, go to our website, preservenys.org, and the very first thing that you should do is read the guidelines. It's so important. I cannot stress this enough. So the TAG grant guidelines will tell you everything you need to know, not only about eligibility and the types of projects that we fund, but when it comes time in your application to write your summary letter, the guidelines spell out exactly what you need to put in that summary letter. So I urge you to read the guidelines first so that you know what to expect in your application, and then fill out your pre-application. The pre-application is very brief. It'll only take you a few minutes to fill out, and it's to help us determine the eligibility of the applicant and the project. And when I get these pre-applications, I will either send you an application link right away so that you can get started on your full application, or I'll give you a call to ask you questions. Either way, I'll work with you to make sure that you know, you're getting the best project you possibly can with your TAG grant, and that you are starting out on the right foot. So at any point in this process, you should contact a consultant. It's never too early to start talking with your consultant about your project. If you're not sure who to contact, don't worry, because when you fill out your pre-application, I will return with an email that includes our consultant list. And these are all consultants who have successfully completed our grant-funded projects over the years. You're not obligated to choose from that list, but it's a good idea to try to choose from that list, because they're people who have dealt with our grants before. They know exactly what to expect. So talk with your consultant of choice and ask for a project proposal and a scope of work. Make sure that they understand the grant guidelines if they've never done a Preservation League funded project before. So you can always share those TAG guidelines with your consultant so that you're on the same page. And then set about taking some photos of your building. As part of your application, we require 5 photographs. At least one should be an overall picture of your building. Make sure that it includes your building context. If the building is on a campus, if it's part of a group of buildings that your organization owns, whatever, you know, make sure that we can see the situation of that building. And then start to narrow in on the specific issues that you want to address with your TAG grant. And so your photographs should get a little more detailed as you go, but 5 photos is all you need. So start taking those when you think of it. Don't wait till the last minute, because it might be cloudy, dark, or raining. So you want to make sure you get out there on a good day and get it done. So when I send you your application link, you do have the opportunity to preview the application before you start working on it. So once you click on the link, it will take you to a description of the TAG program. And at the bottom of the page, it'll say preview. So click on that, and it'll allow you to preview the application form before you begin filling it out. You can even print it out if you'd like, so that you can sit and look at it. You can share it with your staff or your board, or your consultant if you want to, and you can all start working on it together. So the application does need to be filled out entirely online. Trust me on this, it's a huge improvement over the way we've done this in the past. So if you've never applied for a TAG grant before from us, in the past we required a PDF form to be filled out and emailed to us along with the uploads, the photographs that you need. The online portal that we're using now allows you to do all that as you go. You can save it and work on it later. It will even save your uploads. So it's easy, and I think you'll find it to be a little more user-friendly than in the past. So we have a question. Let's see. Let me make sure I didn't miss anything. Okay, so while working on the grant, can you save it as you go? Yes. Yeah, I know you typed that before I said it. That's a great question. You can work on it little by little. It will even save your uploads. So that's a huge relief. You don't have to scramble to upload all your attachments at the end. You can do it as you go. So make sure that you compile your needed attachments ahead of time. It'll just make your job easier as you go through the application. You can put them on a folder on your desktop. There's nothing unusual that's needed. I think we need a list of your board members and budgets, and we'll get to all that in a moment. But, and of course, your photographs. So once you complete your application, be sure and click submit before the deadline on October 15th at 11:59 p.m. And of course, as always, don't be afraid to ask me questions. I'm always available to answer your questions about your application. I cannot work on your application with you and I can't preview it, but you can certainly ask me questions. All right. So you might be wondering how we evaluate these TAG applications. So we convene an independent review panel made up of expert preservationists from around the state. So these are museum people, architects, engineers. Some of our consultants serve on our review panel at times. We try not to invite people who are involved in any of the applications directly. So, but we get a diverse panel of about 4 or 5 people to review these applications, and then they score them individually based on 3 criteria. So each application is reviewed and scored and considered on its own merits. We don't compare one application to another. We just go through them one by one. The 3 criteria we use to score them are historic preservation excellence and project quality, fiscal and managerial competence, and service to the public. So it's important to remember to address all 3 of these in your summary letter so that we know that your project scores highly in all 3 of these criteria. So the panel scores your application on a scale of 1 to 5 for each of these 3 criteria. And then we average that score to get 1 score for your application. At the end of the day, we have all the scores for all of the applications we received, and we rank them from lowest to highest scoring. And based on the amount of funding we have, we draw a line somewhere in that score. And we're able to fund, above a certain score. We never know what that score is going to be. It's always a heartbreaking thing when we see a project that falls just below that line that we can't fund. But last year we had enough funding. I think we funded almost all of the applications we got last year. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to do the same this year. It was really wonderful. We always receive a lot of really high quality applications, and while we can't fund them all, we certainly would like to. So so here are some tips for putting your best foot forward with your grant, making sure that it's competitive. The very first is to make sure you read through the forms and directions before you begin. So of course, start with the TAG grant guidelines. They are on our website. It's a PDF form that you can print out and, like I said, share with your staff, share with your board, make sure everybody understands what is required for the application. This can help you write your summary letter as well. Make sure that when you fill out the pre-application that you describe just your TAG project. It will ask you to describe your project. I don't need to necessarily know your overall plans for the building, your long-term capital project plans, anything like that, you can allude to them. But I really want to know, how are you going to spend your TAG funds? And here's a hint, they are to pay your consultant. So be sure and tell me in that description what you want that consultant to do. What do you want to learn about your building? And that's how your TAG funds will be spent. So be sure you preview your application form. As I mentioned, it helps you mentally prepare for filling out the application. And as you go through to fill out your application, if you hover your mouse over a question or over the box to type in your question, you'll see some help boxes that pop up occasionally to help explain what we're looking for in an answer. I try to keep our questions really straightforward. This probably is one of the easiest grants you'll ever apply for, but nonetheless, there are some help boxes that pop up to help you answer your question in the most thorough and accurate way possible. So hopefully you all will find that helpful too. Tip number 2, pay attention to your budgets. So we're going to ask you for 2 budgets in your application. The first is your organizational budget. This is simply a statement of the income and expenses for a year for your organization for the current year, or for the current year. So for a 2021 TAG grant, we want to see your 2021 budget. Okay. If you're a municipality, though, we don't want to see the entire municipal budget, please. Some of those can be like 50 pages long. So instead, if you're a municipality, submit a 1-page summary of income and expenses for the department that's in charge of overseeing your grant application. So for instance, it might be your parks department, it might be your planning department, but wherever that grant is going to fall within your municipality, show us that part of the budget. And make sure that in your budget, that you're showing the funds for your 20% match. We want to see that those funds are dedicated already. So, if we get the TAG grant, we've got this 20% match already set aside, already earmarked for it. So we want to make sure that you're committed to that match and that you can demonstrate it in your budget. So secondly, we'll want to see a project budget. This is a lot easier than it sounds. This will come from your consultant. So this is the amount of money that the consultant is going to be paid in order to complete the report or survey for your TAG project. So what I don't want to see here is a lump sum. So some consultants are really tempted to say, sure, I'll do an accessibility study for a lump sum of $5,000. Boom. That's not a budget. That's just a lump sum. So what I'd like to see instead from your consultant is a breakdown of the project tasks, the deliverables, and the totals. They can put their hourly fees for all the everyone in their office that's going to work on the project if they want. But I would really like to see some line items in there and how they come up with their total cost for the project. So keep that in mind. Make sure your consultant understands, not a lump sum. Be sure and get us a breakdown of deliverables and totals. So now one thing that I don't want to see as part of a project budget is the projected capital expenses for the restoration project for your building. So that's all going to come later. After your TAG project is all said and done, then you get to focus on your capital project. But we don't need to know those numbers, so you don't have to worry about that for your TAG application. So as I mentioned, for your TAG application, you need to submit 5 images. The application will actually not allow you to click submit until you upload all 5 images. So plan ahead, get out there, take pictures of your building and of the issues to be addressed by your TAG project. So a good example, and one that I particularly like, is from the Lower East Side Tenement Museum. These 5 images on your screen are what they submitted with their TAG application last year. The reason I like this so much is because they were applying for a mechanical engineering and plumbing analysis. And you might think to yourself, well, what are they going to take a picture of, their boiler? And no, what they did is they took an overall picture of their building first so that we could visualize what their building looks like. And then they took an interior photo that shows one of the exhibit spaces in their building. So if you've ever been on a tour of the Tenement Museum, if you haven't, you should go. But if you've ever been, you'll know that they talk about the ventilation in their building on their tour, because this tenement had notoriously poor ventilation. The families that lived there had few windows in their apartments, and at the back of each apartment, they had a ventilation shaft. So they had a window that opened into a shaft that was supposed to provide ventilation, but instead, some families threw their garbage down in there, and worse. It was smelly, it was not good for ventilation. Things have improved since then, as you can imagine, since they're a museum. However, thanks to COVID, they're really looking to improve the ventilation in their building so that they can safely give tours again to the public. So they've included a few photographs of the roof of the building, kind of ventilation shafts that they have opening up there. And then the last photo is one of those historic ventilation shafts in the center of the building, so that we could really visualize the kinds of things that they're struggling with in terms of ventilation. So yeah, so I'm anxious to see what comes from their tag project, but these are the photos they submitted. I thought that they were excellent, especially considering the rather dry topic of ventilation. So again, I can't stress highly enough how important images are. These two images were submitted with an application years ago, and they were the only two submitted with that application. It shows us an overall image of the building, which is a good thing, but then this very detailed image, which we weren't really sure what it was at first, but it's a very old electrical outlet in the floor. Maybe some images in between would be a good idea. So if you're looking to have an electrical assessment done of your building, try to use your imagination, much like they did at the Tenement Museum. Show us some photos that really help tell the story of the need that is being addressed by your tag grant. All right, well, I covered a lot of material in a fairly short amount of time. And if you have any questions, I urge you to either type them in your chat box right now, and I'll certainly answer them, or you can give me a call. You can email. I'm always happy to talk about your project. If you have an idea for a project and you're not sure that it's a good tag project, please call me. We can talk about it. Tell me about your building. Tell me about its needs. If it's not a good tag project, it might be a good Preserve New York project for the spring. Those grants are larger than they're meant to be planning grants to proceed large capital projects. These tag grants are meant to be small, bite-sized projects for your building, so they're a great place to start. You can apply for tag every single year as long as you've completed your project from the previous year. Yeah, so please get a hold of me with any questions. The deadline is Friday, October 15th at 11:59 p.m. This webinar and the one that I gave last Monday are actually recorded and can be found on our YouTube page. And then coming up, I've got some drop-in help sessions. So as you start work on your application, if you run into a snag or you need some help, sign up for one of our help sessions. And these are all really useful. When a bunch of people sign up for a help session, they tend to learn from one another's questions. It's always a lively discussion. You get one-on-one help. You can drop in and drop out as needed. You don't have to stay the whole hour. But it's always, informational, and I think it's helpful to folks. So 2 Monday mornings and 1 Thursday evening coming up for these help sessions. So I hope you'll join me. And, I look forward to seeing all your pre-applications. Already, we've got some good projects rolling in. Keep in touch with the Preservation League, please, on our website and on social media. And last but not least, if you enjoyed this presentation and if you appreciate the work that the Preservation League does across the state, please consider becoming a member. We need your donations. We appreciate them. And you can help support the work that we do that way. All right. I'm going to stop screen sharing now, and I'll take any questions that you have before we wrap it up. Let me make sure that I didn't miss any. I appreciate you all showing up. I recognize some of your names. I remember some of your projects from previous discussions, so I certainly hope to see your pre-applications. If you have any questions, let me know. All right, I don't see any questions. You all have a wonderful evening. Thank you for joining me. And yeah, it is a lot to digest. So if you think of something later, please send me an email or give me a call. All right. Thanks, everyone.